Cimo, as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, what is the one thing that you want to do the most in your video game? Other than winning, of course.
Draw cards.
Excellent. Well done. 100% on the pop quiz.
We don't get to do that very often.
Well, the good news is I'm going to make you very jealous, and I'm going to show you cards that draw in Hearthstone. And your job is to tell me whether or not you think they're good. Now, I have shown you cards that I've drawn before. You will not be seeing them today. The best example I can give you is Secret Passage. Remember, 1 mana, draw 5. That's pretty great. But you will not.
Where you get the extra hand? Is that what that card was?
Yeah, the extra hand, pretty much. Yeah. But in this video, I'm going to show you much more simple draw cards rather than giving you a very flashy effect. And your job is just to tell me whether or not you think it's playable. Let's start off with maybe the most OG draw card in the game.
Okay. Novice Engineer. It's a 2 mana for a 1/1 battle cry. Draw a card. That's all it does.
That's it. So I will tell you. I'm going to tell you this. For each one of these cards, I'm going to tell you the year they were printed because I do think it's this was at the beginning of the game, so 2014.
Beginning of the game's lifespan. 2 mana 1/1 battle cry, draw a card. It's crazy because I think about like with Yu-Gi-Oh, and you and I did a video on draw cards not too long ago. You saw the hoops we had to jump through just for like a single card draw. And in Hearthstone, you just get it. Here you go. Have it. 2 mana, you get a card. Early on in the game, this is probably fine. Like, I could see decks playing this because, again, like, you're already playing with 30-card decks anyway, and just filtering the deck for 2 mana if you need something to do, like, sure. I think, like, if you're playing certain decks that are trying to aim for, like, a certain combo or just have a reason to have a thinner deck, like, if you're trying to work towards some win condition that isn't, like, traditional, just, like, beat face and such, I could see a card like this being played. I wouldn't see it being played in like every deck, but I could see like control decks especially probably wanting to play something like this. They wouldn't mind swapping this out for another card. So I'll say this card was like good, like average to good at best.
Average to good. Okay, I think that's a good representation again. So yeah, in 2014 there wasn't a ton of drawing was I want to say, like, I have to probably explain this as well. As time goes on, they started to give draw to almost every single class, where in the early days of Hearthstone, there were key classes that did get a ton of draw. And this card was obviously neutral, so they have to just kind of, what is the mana cost for drawing a card, at least in classic Hearthstone? And this was the rate, 2 mana, 1/1. The most comparable thing for you, by the way, is the Warlock hero power. So the 2 mana
pays 2 to draw a card and you take 2 damage, right?
Yes, which is like the best hero power in classic for the record. So you'll see how drawing kind of changed over the years. But yeah, you were right. This card was used in combo decks. That was the main thing. In Freeze Mage, it was the most popular because you're just looking for your actual combo pieces. I don't really remember it being played in a ton of slower control decks. Maybe someone in the comments remembers, but this card was played. You were 100% correct in one of the best decks in Classic. Good analysis. Here's our next one. This was in 2016.
Darkshire Librarian. 2 mana for a 3/2. Battle Cry, discard a random card. Death Rattle, draw a card. So you play it, you get a guy, you discard a random card. You love your random in this game. And then if it dies, it replaces itself and you draw a card.
Yes.
I think you've answered this for me before. Aren't there cards? They might be newer. Yeah, when was this released? That might help answer my question.
This is 2016.
So a couple years later.
It's a couple years later. Now, I think it's very important for a lot of these things I'm going to show you is the actual stats of the card. Normally, you're mainly looking at the effect like it is in Yu-Gi-Oh! But now this is a 2 mana 3/2. And with maybe a slight...
We see in Yu-Gi-Oh! When you ignore the stats, how well that works for you. So
hey, listen. Yu-Gi-Oh! is a bunch of text with some numbers at the bottom. Hearthstone is a little bit of text with numbers on the bottom. There's a slight difference.
Slight difference. Okay. Discarding in your game is a lot different because you have like this void, right? Where like everything kind of goes and you don't really have access to it at free will. So, but if I recall, I think you've told me in previous videos, or you've showed me cards before, that like Demon Warlock has like demon type synergies that like they want to be discarded, I think. So maybe there's a potential synergy there. So like discarding could be a plus side, even though it is random. You could kind of manipulate your hand in such a way. I think the stats are okay. I mean, a 2 mana 3/2, I think could compete with 3 drops just because it does have 3 attack, maybe even some 4 drops potentially, so that could be kind of annoying. I I think it's just weird because the card is random, right? And random is just, yes, you can manipulate it, but the fact that it's random, like maybe you don't care. Like maybe it's just so good that you, even if you discard something.
So I won't, this is important to note, is that this is a Warlock card. You can only play this in Warlock. So you have to ask yourself, are you running a Darkshire librarian, or are you just tapping on turn 2? Like using your hero power. Sorry, tapping is the phrase.
Right.
That
well, and see, that's where it's contextual, right? Because again, depending on the way your hand plays out, if you have things like, let's say at that point you have Darkshire librarian and a couple of cards that are like discard food, right? Playing Darkshire librarian might be better, but you have to hope that you have that combination of cards, because maybe it's like a thing where you discard it and it, like, I don't know, summons like a big guy, right? It's like, oh, if this is discarded, you just play it, right? So that's like, oh, you get a 3/2 and a 4/4 for that, and this thing will draw you cards. So then you get like way ahead. But if you don't have that combination, I think you would just rather draw the card. But you can also just like wait and play it later until you have the right opportunity to get that huge surge of power. So I think this is, I want to say this is good. I think especially because it's a Warlock card, I think it kind of checks all the boxes. Sure, let's say it's good.
Okay, so I think your analysis is pretty spot on. The context you don't have is whether or not there is a discard deck available for Warlock.
Right.
They actually printed a lot of cards in, I believe, this set as well as future sets to kind of make discard Warlock playable. They've actually done this for like Warlock's entire history, because discarding like is a key characteristic of like what Warlock can do. This card was actually played in the discard Zoo Warlock deck, because worst case scenario,
perfect.
Yeah, it's worst case scenario, like, yeah, you just lose a card, but you gain a card in the future unless they silence it. Best case scenario, you hit a really good minion that says like, when this is discarded, summon it, and then like all of a sudden you're winning the game. That was actually like not the most likely in the world, but if it did happen, you were pretty far ahead. All right, here's your next one. This one is 2015.
Gnomish,
so the year before this.
Experimenter. Okay, so the year before, but after the other one. Okay. 3 mana, 3/2, same stats, but this is neutral, so you can play this in anything. Battlecry, draw a card. If it's a minion, transform it. What the fuck's a chicken? Is it just like a 1/1, a 0/1?
It's literally just a 1/1 here. I'll give you the token for it just so you can see.
I appreciate it. Yeah, not that I don't think that matters. It was just a 1/1 token.
Let me grab it for you. Hold on. What's
draw
this
a card name? If it's a minion, it's a chicken.
So again, I was telling you how bad draw is.
Oh, clearly.
For the most part. So the concept behind this card, right, is if you're in a deck that wants to draw as much as possible and you're running maybe, I don't know, only spells.
Right, then you're always going to get a free draw out of it.
Then you get a free draw, right? And you get the 3/2 body, which isn't the worst thing in the world. Some decks would maybe want to run that.
The chicken token's killing me. That's awesome. But even then, right? Like, I feel like you would just run Novice Engineer over this. Like, granted, like, you could play those and then play this as, like, your third and fourth copy of draw power if you're playing, like, a non-minion-based deck. There's actually... God, I can't say things. I want to say things. But, like, if we do the video, it's going to ruin it. So, right. I will say there's a similar concept to this card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Okay. Much newer, I will say, because obviously this you said is quite old. So I feel like, okay, so here's the problem I'm seeing with this. Even in the instance of if you're playing this in a deck that is like all spells, the win condition of that deck might be a minion. And it's like if you 0.1% variance Gnomish Experimenter your win condition, then you just lose the game as a result of it. Like you're going to just Alt F4 out of the game immediately, right?
Okay.
But if it's like a spell-based win condition, like if you're just trying to send a bunch of fireballs at someone's face or something along those lines and you don't care, then like, yeah, in those spell-based decks, like, I don't know why you would... It's weird because obviously Mage is like the only thing I really know. Like Mage has the 3 mana draw 2, right? And it's like, again, you could play that and this and the Engineer and like, okay, like you have like infinite draw power and you're playing like a 22 card deck at that point, right? But even then, like, are you that desperate?
So
this seems rough. I'm going to say that I don't buy it. I think this was like, maybe if you're playing like an all spells combo deck, that is like the only deck that would play this card. If you tell me that this was like every deck was playing this, I'm going to be genuinely surprised.
No, this card is trash.
Okay,
you're 100% right. Yeah, so the concept was that this was at the time a better rate than Novice Engineer, because there is a card called Loot Hoarder, which is the same mana cost as Novice Engineer that was also printed classic, but instead of a battle cry, it's a death rattle. And decks that would want to be more consistent would run that, but because it's not an immediate effect, it could be a little slow. So Gnomish Experimenter comes in and be like, oh, like it's Novice Engineer, but there's a little bit of a twist to it. And in the right deck, it might be good. But yeah, like there's no decks that actually want to run that. Like there's no fucking way. So
okay. Howling Commander. Man, they do love their 3 mana draw cards, don't they? 3 mana, 2/2. Battlecry, draw a Divine Shield minion from your deck. Remind me, so Divine Shield is like the first time it takes damage, it doesn't take any, right? Something like that.
Yeah. In this case, this card is basically just a 3 mana 2/2. But to tutor a specific Divine Shield minion.
Correct. Yeah, I was just clarifying what Divine Shield does.
Yeah.
Remember. My mind is like, okay, so here's where my mind's going with this. My mind's like, if there's like a crazy Divine Shield minion, like a legendary or an epic card or something, you're playing 2 Howling Commander and then that card, and basically this card's purpose is to search that card exactly, and you play like no other Divine Shield minions, and that's like the card that's going to basically win you the game or like help you basically win the game, then this card is good. I mean, on the surface, it's just a card that gets you another card, which is fine, but I think the problem is depending on the quality of the Divine Shield minions, that like is what dictates maybe like how good or bad this card is. But maybe like you're fine just getting an average Divine Shield. Like maybe you're only going to play the good Divine Shield things anyway. So whatever this guy pulls, you're happy with. I could see this being good. It really just depends on the quality of like what the other Divine Shield minions are at the time. Because it's kind of like the Warlock card, right? If discard Warlock isn't a thing yet, then that's going to make this card way worse. But if there's really good Divine Shield minions, then this card's probably going to be an auto 2 of like in every Paladin deck. So, sure, I'll say this card's good.
Okay, so good is not where I would put it, shockingly. Unfortunately for Paladin, it didn't really run this card. At this point in time, Frozen Throne especially, is where we started to see like, you know, the power creep kind of come up a little bit, and a 3 mana 2/2 at this point in time is not really what you're playing. I think most people, like, you're right. If there was a really good Divine Shield minion, this is probably like an A tier card, maybe not even an A tier card, like just enough to put into your deck. But on average, like this card was rarely ran. Like you never saw this card. All right, speaking of Paladin, while you're talking about this, I gotta get my cat out of the room before he wrecks my entire wire thing, but I'm listening to you.
Divine Favor. Cool art on this one. 3 mana, not a minion, so I don't have to worry about stats. It's 3 mana. I think I said that already. Draw cards until you have as many and in hand as your opponent. This card's fucking crazy. Why are you showing me this, Rarran?
What do you mean?
Like, this card's nuts.
Why? What do you mean nuts?
This card's so good.
Why?
Because, what do you mean why?
What if you have more cards than your opponent?
Okay, let me explain to you why this is good, right? This means that if especially, I don't know if okay, Paladin, I'm going to go on record by saying this. I have not had a good track record evaluating Paladin cards. Clearly, even just the last card. Apparently, for some reason, Paladin cards just seem to elude me. So you know what? I'm going to preface this by saying I'm probably wrong, but that's okay. But if there's like, hypothetically, if there's like, the thing that comes to mind is you just throw everything on the board. You're playing like some super aggressive deck, and then you have no other cards, and then you just Divine Favor your whole hand back, and then guess what? You can just do it all over again. So this is like an insane card for aggro. I could see like in Control, it could questionably be played, but it could be good in the sense that like if you are in a situation where you need to deploy a lot of your cards in like a mid-game scenario, and then you just use this to like kind of get those resources back so you're not behind on the resource game in like a control versus control match, because that's obviously like very resource intensive. I still think it's good there too. And the thing is, with your game compared to Yu-Gi-Oh, you don't have interaction on the opponent's turn. So it's not like you go, oh, Divine Favor, oh, I'm going to Ash Blossom Divine. No, it just resolves. Like, if you see there's a 4-card deficit between you and your opponent, you get 4 cards. Like, that's crazy. And granted, Hearthstone, you guys don't value cards as much as we do. This card is crazy. If this was in Yu-Gi-Oh, this would like, okay, let me actually... I can't say it. I can't say anything. Oh my God. Everyone who knows Yu-Gi-Oh knows exactly what I was about to say. They know exactly what I was about to say. I think this card's nuts. I think this card is so good.
I'm gonna have to title this video, Yu-Gi-Oh player gets triggered over draw cards.
There you go. I'm sure that'll be perfect bait for everyone.
So this card actually fluctuated. I think on average, it would be considered good. Okay. And I would agree. I hope that. So. You actually got you said it right at the start. In an aggro deck, right? You flood the board, you draw this card, and then all of a sudden it's like you're right back to where you started with all these resources, but you still have a board. That was arguably back in the early days of Hearthstone, one of the most frustrating. Yeah, it was so frustrating to play against. I am almost 100% sure that this card got Hall of Famed at some point, which you should remember.
Really?
Like they banned it from the game. Yeah, because I think at this point, I'd be curious to see if I can find the as you're evaluating the next card, I will give you the analysis of this card. But yeah, for the exact reason that you thought, like, it's just, if this card gets played and you're like a slow deck and you have to keep up with all these resources that Paladin gets, oh my god, it was so frustrating. So yeah, like exactly what you said, you put in an aggro deck, flood the board, get a new hand.
Fight Promoter, 6 mana, 4/4 battle cry. If you control a minion with 6 or more health, draw 2 cards. See, I feel like in Yu-Gi-Oh, something like this would be crazy potentially. Obviously, like, it'd have to be worded differently. But if there was, like, if you control a monster with X stat or condition, you draw 2, that would be very good. Potentially. Yeah. It depends on the context. But, like, just anything that says draw 2 on Yu-Gi-Oh, our eyes light up, obviously.
I mean, I think this is the first time I've shown you draw 2 cards, right? Yeah, this is the first one.
Well, technically, Divine Favor could draw you 10 in, like, the best case scenario.
But remember, this is neutral. This is neutral.
Yeah, it is neutral.
This is still at a time where majority of classes did not have a great way of drawing.
I guess, like, trying to think. I think it's maybe Paladin. I think maybe Priest might be what I'm thinking of. I know there's 1 or 2 classes that have the ability to give extra health to, like, above its base health to things. So I'm trying to think if there's, like, other ways where you can still play, like, lower cost stuff, but then, like, buff your things so that this card is more consistent instead of hoping to get... Because the problem is, if you need a 6 health minion, right, you have to have, like, the big 6 health minion and then play this, and that's kind of all you're doing for the next 2 turns. I think, like, in Arena, that might be okay. But, like, for Constructed, that might be kind of slow unless you have a way to cheese it. Like, if there's, like, a... What am I trying to think of? I'm trying to think if there's, like, low-cost minions, and then you have some way to just give them health, and now they have 6 health. They somehow live. And then you get to play this and draw 2. Would you go through all those steps? I feel like at that point, you would just play better cards.
Okay. What if I told you that if this card has 6 health, it counts as it?
Oh, it counts itself. That's cool. Oh, because you guys have the ability to, like, buff stuff, like, in the hand and deck too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's something that obviously, like, physical
and
cards,
that
you can't do
was
that.
actually a core mechanic of this set for 3 of the classes.
Okay, so then basically the idea then is you play, like, these buffing spells for either the hand or deck, I don't know what, and then ideally then you're just paying 6 to play this and draw 2 and get a 4/6 or a 6/6 if it's +2/2. I don't know what the stats are, but I'm just, like, you know, theorizing. Would you just play a 6/6 that draws you 2 cards?
That's a great question. That's what this comes down to, right?
Would you rather be paying 6 mana to do something better, I guess is the way I'm looking at this. Like, better, like, not that drawing 2 cards is bad, but, like, what else can you do with 6 mana at this point? Like, are you able to drop some, like, giant legendary that's, like, borderline game winning? Maybe. I don't know. So that's, like, kind of where I'm at with this. The red flag is I feel like there might just be better things to do on 6. So I feel like this card is, like, fine. And maybe this is, like, the craziest thing you could be doing on turn 6. Blow my mind.
Okay, so you're going with fine, right? That's what you said?
I'm going with fine.
So a little bit of history here. This card actually was regarded as one of the best cards in the set.
Really? Wow.
I'm telling you, in 2016 Hearthstone, not a lot of great ways of drawing. You would run out of resources. They would happen pretty often. This card was looked at as, like, one of the best neutral cards to start drawing. Can be used in any class. There's a bunch of ways of actually buffing the health, and other classes just have big statted minions that this would be completely fine if you just played it with it. But this card was unplayable. Actually unplayable.
Oh, thank God.
It's weird because, like, even with the hand buff stuff, the card does have potential. But the problem is that maybe it's just the circumstances of just how they balance the cards that are the classes that actually got the hand buff. But those classes were not good.
Doom!
2016. Nice.
Sorry, I had to do that.
No, you're good. You're good.
Does it, like, make that sound effect? 10 mana, destroy all minions, draw a card for each. This would be busted in Yu-Gi-Oh. I'm just going to say that right now. This would be, like, an auto 3 of in every deck. Now, granted, it costs 10, so, like, it'd be free in Yu-Gi-Oh, so I doubt we'd be able to get away with it. Draw a card for each. This is Warlock, too, I just realized. Okay.
Yeah, it's Warlock.
And Warlock is fine with this, though, because, like, half the time you don't care if your stuff dies. In fact, you want it to die, probably. So you probably just get even more value if your own stuff dies on this. So my biggest gripe with this is that it costs 10. I'm pretty sure I've seen board wipes that are cheaper than this before. They obviously don't draw you a card in addition to destroying everything, but, you know, a board wipe's a board wipe at the end of the day. And if you're playing this is all you're doing for the turn. Where if they're cheaper board wipes, you can at least board wipe and maybe follow up with something potentially. But man, just think of the dream of you kill everything and you draw like 6 or 5 cards. Man, It sounds good. The problem is you're like mana cucked and you can't actually play any of the cards. So maybe that doesn't matter. But if your opponent has like no follow-up, then you probably just win the game off of this. But would you have just won the game anyway if they have no follow-up and you board wipe them and you like didn't draw 6? I guess it depends on how many cards you have. I feel like in control, this card would be really good. But aside from that, I feel like it's just expensive. That's my only concern with it. But I feel like if you resolve it, you probably are going to be in like a game-winning position. So I'm going to asterisk good card, but only in like the right deck. Otherwise, I think most decks aren't going to consider playing it.
Okay. So this card came out at Whispers of the Old Gods, which means it had a rotation benefit as well. A lot of the older stuff is rotated out. And I have been playing this game for maybe, 11 years at this point. I've never seen this card get cast.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Not even like in Control Warlock. Interesting. No, I guess they would just play Twisting Nether at that point, right? So
Twisting Nether was, at this point, maybe a little bit out of being played at all. Because you'd rather develop something. You'd rather develop than play 8 mana to clear board at this point. There is just better stuff for you to be doing. Also, this is in the same expansion as Yogg. But the main thing is Warlock has tapping. Like, if Warlock didn't have the hero power to tap, I don't know. I think this might actually be played a little bit more. But why am I spending 10 mana when I could just hit 2 mana like every single turn and just draw a card?
The Curator. Very menacing name. 7 mana, 4/6. Taunt. Battle Cry. Draw a Beast, Dragon, and Murloc from your deck. So it's basically, if you remove all the text or simplify the text, it's 7 mana, 4/6, draw 3 cards. Obviously, you would need to build your deck in such a way. This is actually a very Yu-Gi-Oh inspired card. I'm going to tell you why. As Yu-Gi-Oh aged, is this a newer Hearthstone card, or is this like kind of old?
This is 2016.
Oh, so this is relatively old. Okay, well, to be fair, at that point, 2016, Yu-Gi-Oh was 14 years old. So anyway, the Yu-Gi-Oh players are going to understand what I'm going to say with this. As Yu-Gi-Oh aged, one of the ways that they started making it so that they could print more powerful cards was that you had to have cards in your deck that basically made your deck less consistent because they weren't necessarily like individually good, but they made a particular card very strong by playing those cards in your deck. For people watching, I'm talking about like Brilliant Fusion, Psyframe Gear Gamma, right? We call these like engine requirements in our game, where it's like you need to play this card that is basically unplayable, but it makes something in the rest of your deck so good that it is worth you taking the concession of happening to like draw that card, because it needs to be in your deck most of the time to use the card. So that's how Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not like all the time, but very commonly now, you start to see these types of effects pop up more and more because it's a trade-off like of power for consistency. And that's what this reminds me of. It's like, I imagine there's a world where there is like a good enough, I'm not concerned about Dragon or Beast. There's probably a good enough Murloc that is okay most of the time, worth playing, that this card, the fact that it's just 7 mana, draw 3 cards, is probably just worth playing, because maybe you want that Dragon or Beast, because especially since this costs 7, the Dragon or the Beast could be like your top end, and that's like what you're trying to like search out of your deck. So I'll say this card's good. And I kind of hope it is, because this guy looks cool. He's got a cool effect. It's like one of the most unique effects I think you showed me. I think it's cool.
So the Curator was in the same expansion as like the librarian guy, the guy who discards.
Okay.
And yeah, the Curator was like, I want to say during that year was probably one of the best cards released. It was actually,
is that good?
It wasn't even like, it might seem shocking, but just drawing 2 cards was generally fine. At this point in time, like Dragon Priest started to be a real deck, and there's a lot of like mid-range decks that would be more than happy to draw 2 cards. You're saying like the Murloc on average was bad. I'm trying to remember what Murloc you were looking for. There was one called Sir Finley Murgleton, who is like from yeah, I know.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sir Finley Murgleton.
I love card games.
What he did was he was a 1 mana 1/3 that you discovered a new hero power. So like, let's say at this point in time you don't want to tap anymore as Warlock, you can look for potentially a better hero power, right?
Do you get to pick, or is it random?
You get to pick between 3 options.
Nice.
Which was which was really fun. Like that was the Murloc generally. I can't remember if there was another one, but Dragon started to become really good. And then obviously Beast started to become really, really good at this point. So 7 mana, draw 3 cards, and you get a 4/6 with Taunt was absolutely phenomenal. This card was like probably a majority of decks at this point in time. Very, very good card.
Valdris Felgorge. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
I think that's correct. I think that is.
Right.
I'm not actually
7
100%.
mana 4/4. Comments can correct me if I butchered that one. Battle Cry. Increase your maximum hand size to 12. Draw 4 cards. Man, you're really trying to get me with these. All right. Qualifying questions here. If I recall, your max hand size is 10.
Yes.
And it's like, if you were to draw an extra card while you have 10, it just like burns it, right? You don't get to keep it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember that.
I will also say that this was printed in 2019.
If you draw cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, you can most likely always play them. Whereas your game, if you play this guy, hand size is 12, draw 4, that might be all you're doing for the turn. Maybe that's fine at the end of the day. But like in Yu-Gi-Oh, and that's why like card draw is just such a premium in our game. If you draw 2, you could probably play those cards immediately. And so that just like gives you such a big burst of power, even though it's way fewer cards comparatively. This just reeks of bait. This just reeks of bait. I know there are other cards that you've shown me historically that draw 3, draw 4. I think, doesn't Rogue have a card that draws 4? I think it costs like 8 or 7.
Yeah. So that is sprint. That's a spell. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a spell. So that's a big difference, right? I mean, you get the body with this guy too, which is like not nothing. I will be shocked if you tell me that there is a huge difference between having a hand size of 10 and a hand size of 12. I feel like that's superfluous at this point. Okay. Maybe there is, but I mean, like I'm coming from the game where our max hand limit is 6. So, like there are cards in our game that can allow us to have more cards in hand technically, but they have never been played. So I think that's like more of a bonus on this guy. It's more like, would you play a 7 mana 4/4 that draws 4 cards that potentially has the upside of drawing giving you a 12 card hand? Like I said, for the control matchups, that extra 2 cards could matter, but for the most part, I think that's just superfluous. I don't think that's like whatever. I want it to be good, whatever that's worth. I also just feel like it's bait. I really feel like it's bait. Like, I feel like you just read this card and you're like, oh, Alex is going to just drool over the fact that it's draw 4 cards. I have to show him this. So I think out of principle alone, I want to think this is bait and this card is not good. And if that gives you a thumbnail, so be it. I think I can't make a proper evaluation either way. So I'm going to play the mind game with you. I think you looked at this, thought I was going to just immediately say this card should be like Hall of Fame ban worthy. And that's it. So yeah, I beat you at your own game.
Wait, so hold on, you're saying it's good or bad? I'm so confused.
I think it's fine. I don't think it was like every deck played this.
Okay, I will say that evaluation is pretty close. This card was pretty bad, unfortunately.
See, I knew you baited me. I would never do anything to mislead you, Alex. I would never want to sway your decision one way or another.
Listen. Here's the problem. It's not actually the effect was bad. It's you're playing a fucking 7 mana 4/4. That is the real problem with this card. If this card was printed on a 5 mana 3/3, let's just say, for instance, this card is guaranteed much more playable.
Oh,
it's
sure.
The fact that you're the stat wise, like, and I'm talking in Hearthstone currently, like board matters a lot. So playing a 7 mana 4/4 is not good enough, like at all at this point. It doesn't have taunt, doesn't have rush. Like, it is just a stupid ass body. Cimo got a haircut midway through this, so in case anyone's curious.
Big ol' whelp. He's just a big ol' whelp. 5 mana, 5/5, battle cry, draw a card. This is really interesting because as you've been showing me these, they progressively get bigger, but then they have the same effect. So it's weird because like the lower cost versions are playable, but are the higher cost versions playable?
Yes.
Because at least they have better stats, right? But I don't know. When I just play a 5 mana 5/5 that draws, I don't even know if I'd play that in Yu-Gi-Oh, to be honest with you. That's like, obviously we love drawing cards, but
like a cycle?
But it's like, it's just like, it doesn't do anything else. It's like, tell me, Rarran, there's got to be better things you do on turn 5 than just play this big old whelp. Like, surely, right?
I mean, surely, yeah. There absolutely is.
You're going to be like, this is the best card in the game at this moment. That's what you're telling me.
All I'm saying is that there is a reason that this card was printed.
There's a reason it was printed. Okay.
There's a key.
They needed pack filler. Oh, is it a dragon? Did I miss the dragon part?
Wait, he's cooking. Hold on.
Okay, but like, Is there like some dumb stuff with like Dragon Queen Alexstrasza is like, oh, you're hoping to hit the big old whelp so you can, but that that just draws a card. Like that's not that. Maybe that's good enough. Maybe it's like a good, like one of the good dragon targets. I don't know. I feel like there's like contextually some reason, like you said, this is good, but for the like I don't think I would play this unless there's a reason to play it, if that makes sense. Like as the cost of cards goes up, they need to be higher and higher impact. And I feel like this probably isn't cutting it unless there's some reason to play it. So that's where I'm at. I think it's bad unless there's a reason to play it.
Yeah, so this card is actually pretty playable, surprisingly.
Really?
Yeah, so
really?
I thought it would be funny to show you this card like near the end, because I showed you Novice Engineer, which is the exact same effect, but this is a 5/5 body. The dragon tag actually matters a ton. There's a ton of cards in Hearthstone that are called, or like, not called, but they have like the text of, if you're holding a dragon, do this effect. So even though the big ol' whelp isn't necessarily like the best card in the world, just by drawing a card, being a 5/5, which at this point in time is still okay. It's not like the worst thing in the world, could be worse. And it draws you, and it's a dragon, was a huge reason why this was playable.
Felfire in the hole. 5 mana is a warlock card. Draw a spell and deal 2 damage to all enemies. If it's a fel spell, that's fun to say, deal 1 more damage. So I'm guessing fel is like kind of like how oh, I see right there. It says fel.
Yeah, it is a fel spell.
I don't know why I didn't see that at first.
You're good.
Okay. Draw a spell. So draw a spell means it takes any spell out of your deck randomly and puts it into your hand.
Yes.
Is this like the reverse thing where you could have a bunch of minions and just have only certain spells you want to draw with this?
There is, I will say, like there's enough density of fel spells in this expansion and just overall what Warlock had at the time that you can easily make every one of your spells fel.
I just like saying fel spells. It just sounds
It is
fun.
nice. I would agree
I'm saying that. like, yeah, okay. The fel spells, like there's a density enough to do it. My thing is like, are there like 1 or 2 that's the only thing you want to grab with this? And then like you're playing all minions besides that. So you're like guaranteeing you will get one of those 2 cards. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Getting any spell, and again, like I would imagine you selectively, unless you just do this because it's 5 mana for a board wipe that does 2 damage, possibly 3 damage and it's also only one-sided. I guess like what if I'm comparing this to like Flame Strike is 7 for 4. I'm gonna assume you can do this for 3 pretty consistently, or like you would build to do that. So I'm gonna assume 5 for 3 versus 7 for 4. Obviously that's mage, so it's like a different
and you
comparison. And you draw. So it's like it's giving you a card. You do it cheaper. That doesn't seem bad. You're gonna be like, this card is absolutely unplayable, and no one has ever played this. I've been playing Hearthstone for 40 years, and I've never seen this card resolved once. That's what you're getting ready to say. I feel like the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm feeling like it's bait, but like it just seems good.
I mean,
if there was a card like this in Yu-Gi-Oh, it would probably be playable for what it's worth.
Just compare it to the last card I sent you.
Well, that was hard to do considering the fact that I have no context for the dragons, right?
That's fair. That is fair.
And this is like, I don't like, yes, there are fel spells. I don't know how good they are. I'll say it's good. Whatever. Tell me this card sucks. That's fine. This card seems okay.
Yeah, it's all
okay.
But
great.
it's
Fantastic.
weird. Okay,
we're going downhill. We're going downhill. The haircut has made us go downhill. That's what I've learned.
If it was like, let's imagine just for like in a world where this is for priest, and it's a draw a spell, deal 2 damage to all enemies. If it's a holy spell, deal 1 more. That card would be undeniably amazing. Like it'd be so good.
So it's the fact that it's in Warlock specifically. The problem with this.
The fact is like a lot of the fel spells aren't inherently great. So you don't want to put a ton of density of fel spells in your deck because otherwise, like, but it's weird. Like if you showed me this card in 2015, 2016 Hearthstone, I wouldn't believe this is printed. Like this is insane for older Hearthstone. The problem is this came out in 2021. So that's why it's significantly worse. But it's like even looking at the card now, it's like still pretty decent.
Crystal Merchant, 2 mana for a 1/4. It's Druid, so it's broken. If you have any unspent mana at the end of your turn, draw a card. Yeah. Oh, I just draw a card though, not draw a card for each. At first, I was like, oh, this is like the craziest card ever.
Your iteration would be so stupid.
That would be so dumb. Hey, I'm Yu-Gi-Oh brain. Sorry. Any unspent mana at the end of your turn, draw a card. You can play this on 2. Well, I guess it's weird. I guess you'd want to play it on 3. If you play it on 3, you have an unspent mana. You immediately get the card draw, and then as long as this sticks around, you can just keep getting cards. See, like, this is weird because you, like, purposely limit what you play just to get extra card draw. And like, that's weird because when you're playing this game, like using all of your mana efficiently is obviously what you want to do because it's like limiting the amount of actions you can take per turn. You're probably going to most likely guarantee you get 1 draw off of this unless you purposely played on 2 to like set it up for next turn. But I just feel like you played on 3 and just that's all you do and just get a card out of it. Sure. As far as Druid goes though, I feel like you've shown me way more broken stuff and I think that's skewed my perception. And I feel like this feels like underpowered for a Druid card. I hope you tell me I'm wrong. I don't think this is very good.
Okay.
I think it's just too, I think the card itself is fine. I just think it's too slow, especially if this is newer.
Okay.
I feel like that's like, I think that the game might just be faster. And I feel like it's fighting for spots in the deck that, I guess it helps you find wild growth potentially if you don't open it. I'm going to say it's like fine and like not great.
Okay, so this one's actually really interesting because in my opinion, this is one of the coolest cards that Druid's ever gotten because of how you have interacted. Yeah. So you kind of like you called it, right? You want to play this on turn 3. But then if you think about it, like, are you really playing 3 or 2 mana, leaving a mana up, having a delayed draw? That sounds horrible, right? You probably wouldn't play that, which means you need a very specific reason to play this. Now read this card.
Untapped potential. Quest, end 4 turns with any unspent mana. Okay, there we go. All right, so in tandem with that, then that makes sense. Sure, of course. This is just the section of limit Alex's knowledge and just screw him over. Sure.
That's every Yugioh video. What do you mean?
I mean, don't call me out. Osirian? Osirian?
I think it's Assyrian. That sounds correct.
Okay.
Assyrian, yeah.
Passive, you choose one. Your choose 1 cards, excuse me, have both effects come out. Oh, that's cool. That's a neat effect.
The reason why this, in my opinion, this quest is really interesting because it made you play less optimally in the early game for like a bigger payoff later in the game. And the way that this would often interact with is that you would play untapped potential. If you were second, you were actually really happy, which doesn't happen often in Hearthstone because you could go untapped potential coin and that coin counts as an empty mana crystal. So then you would proc the quest.
Oh, that's cool.
And then if you had Innervate on top of that, you could use Crystal Merchant into Innervate and play Crystal Merchant on turn 2, draw a card, and progress your quest. So there was ways to manipulate it to make it a little bit more consistent, but the quest was the biggest reason why this was played. But this card actually was a key definer in the deck.
Do you think without the quest, the card would be played?
No.
Okay, that's where I was at. Good.
There's literally no way for you to play less optimally to like delay your card draw. It doesn't make any sense.
Guess the weight. That's funny. 2 mana. This is Druid again, I think. Yep. Draw a card. Guess if your next card costs more or less to draw it. This is so funny. This is like, what is it, higher or lower?
Yep. Actually what it is.
Okay, so it cycles itself, so at least it replaces itself. Guess if your next card costs more or less to draw it. So how does this work? Do you just like, does 2 buttons come up and it's like pick higher or lower and then does it reveal the card? Yeah,
I believe, yes, it will show you what the card is. Yes, I don't think your opponent sees it. Only you get to see it, but they will see if you draw it or not.
Interesting. Speaking of like weird deck building concessions you could do with this. This is kind of neat. I'm trying to think.
I also believe if it's the same cost, it goes back into your deck regardless.
That sounds right because that's like the whole point of like higher or lower is that if it's the same, you bust, basically.
Yes. Yeah, I believe that's the case.
I'm trying to think how you would like build around this. So it's basically a 2 mana draw 2 if you always get it right, which is better than like a typical rate for the most part. I'm just trying to think from like a deck building perspective how you would do this because like I feel like that's so tough because
but do you need to build your deck around it? Like you just remember what you drew and then like do a percentage on it, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you like do the calcs and you like hope for the best, but is that like worth you playing the card in the first place? Because otherwise it's just a 2 mana draw 1.
That's fair.
And like why would you waste your time on that? Like this is like, we talk about this a lot in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where there are cards that are like controlled randomness, right? Where it's like, if you can make the probability work in your favor, like, does that mean the card is like still worth playing or not, right? I think when you and I did a video talking about like the random cards, this like sort of came up. I guess you get the knowledge of what's on top as well, even if you don't draw it, because it stays on top, right?
Yeah. Yes, it would. Yeah.
Okay, so if it stays on top, like at least you can sort of plan ahead by a turn potentially, which like could be valuable depending on like the way your hand's shaping up. Like if you get the 2 mana draw 2, you feel great. If you don't, you want to put your fist through your monitor. My gut's telling me it's too like I feel like you would just want to play better stuff than this. It definitely seems like there is like some cool potential with it, but it's like just the variance on it. I'm not sold on it. So I'm going to say no. I'm going to say it's not particularly good.
Okay. You know what's really interesting is this card was very played. It's
really,
yeah. So
okay.
It's
cooked in the last half of this video.
I mean, I'm kind of glad. I specifically wanted to pick ones that you would make you think just like, oh, like this is just really good, right? I don't want to give you secret passage every single time. Then it would be like too easy. This one's really interesting, but I think the real reason why it's playable is because generally from the card you draw, you can make a huge judgment on whether or not you think it's going to be higher or lower, right? And even if you do draw 2 mana to cycle for Druid isn't the worst thing in the world. Like people will still play Wild Growth at 10 mana to get that extra draw. Like just for, like in a sense, Wild Growth could be at 10 mana, 2 mana to draw a card, and that's fine. But there's so many times where you will get 2 mana draw 2 with a card like this that it was playable in a variety of different decks.
Wow. Okay. Tinyfin's Caravan, 2 mana, 1/3. At the start of your turn, draw a Murloc. It's a very cute card. I like the crab.
Yeah, it's a very nice card.
Yeah. Start of your turn, draw a Murloc. Play this on 2. It's a Shaman card. I think Shaman has a lot of Murlocs. Is that a thing? Like more Murlocs than like other archetypes?
I will give you a lot of context for Shaman. Okay. Shaman historically does not have good draw. Like historically, it has been a class that has never had good draw. Shaman also really likes, has like an affinity towards Murloc. I shouldn't say really likes because I don't know how they feel about it in general, but they do tend to print a ton of Murlocs for Shaman over the years. As you could probably guess for this set, there was a lot of Murlocs. So they made this card to make the Murloc deck dream a reality. Because one of the biggest problems with like Murloc decks is you kind of need to go on board as quick as possible to start building up that synergy because they're all very like compounding. So the hope is like you don't lose tempo by playing a card like this, just to draw.
Got it. So you're playing like some sort of like Murloc aggro deck with this and hoping that you just like keep... Yeah, and you still draw your additional card, right? You get your Murloc and your draw.
Yes, you will. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I mean, again, it's sort of contextual, like how good the Murlocs are. But again, if we're in this world of there's this like aggressive Murloc deck that's trying to win the game very quickly, and this is getting you to those aggressive cards compared to like whatever else you can draw, and plus you're drawing 2 cards a turn with it as well. It sucks it's the start of your turn because you have to wait a full turn to go around before you actually get the value off of it. So if they interact with it, that is just like you like wasted your turn. And at that point, would you rather just play something else? And also, if you're playing an aggro deck, would you rather just play something else that's because this only has 1 attack and you're kind of just, I mean, this is sort of like helping supply you for the rest of the game. But if this just dies, then kind of did nothing. I want this to be good just because it's cute. I just think it's a very funny looking card. Like if you tell me this is like the best card in Shaman at the time, it's like, oh good, this is like, you know, one of those cards that's like strikes fear into all card game players because it's adorable and it's a menace. It could be like, oh, if this thing doesn't get answered, like you just lose the game if you're playing against like the aggro Murloc deck. Maybe I'll humor you. I'll say this card's good. Final answer.
Wait, are you just saying that because you want it to be good, or do you actually think it's good?
I kind of because I want it to be good. Yeah.
All right, this card was horrible.
Okay, I figured.
So here's the problem with this card though. It's not a Murloc. If it was a Murloc, this card would have been like gone from absolute ass tier to like actually very much playable. But because you take that 1 turn to play a 2 mana 1/3 that doesn't have the Murloc tag, it's infinitely worse.
That's what I was thinking. It feels like it just slows you down way too much just taking the turn to play this.
Yeah,
I just wanted it to be good because it's funny.
It's also like, unfortunately, it's at the start of your turn. If it was at the end of your turn, I think it's playable. I think it's very much playable. Yeah. The start is such a big thing in Hearthstone because it has to live, and I'm sure it's the same thing in Yu-Gi-Oh. But when the board matters a lot in Hearthstone, like you can't get away with this majority of the time. So unfortunately, this card sucked. All right, you have 1 more card. This is your final test. This might be the most interesting one. And I'm very excited to see how you react to this, considering that I think this card's very playable in Yu-Gi-Oh! But here you go.
That's saying something. Malygos the Spellweaver. Cool name and art. 9 mana for a 4/12. Battle cry. Draw spells until your hand is full. And that's from your deck, right? You're not just like making them appear out of thin air.
Yes, from your deck, yep.
Interesting. Playable in Yu-Gi-Oh, huh?
You don't think that's playable in Yu-Gi-Oh?
It's hard to say. I'll get into it.
Really? Okay.
So, like, you play this on 9. Best case scenario, if you have no cards in hand, you get 10 spells. Honestly, that's never going to happen. You'll probably have, like, a few other cards in hand. So, like, let's say on average, you're going to draw 3 to 4 spells. Let's say 3 to 4, maybe 5 if you're lucky, which is still a bunch of card value, and you're playing all the good spells in your deck. Problem is this costs 9, so you're probably not playing any of those spells this turn. Like, even if you kept coin this whole time, like, you're only going to be able to play a 2-mana thing anyway. But it gives you a ton of spells, which is crazy. See, like, the thing is in Yu-Gi-Oh, if there was a card that's like you play this and it adds, like, a bunch of spells to your hand, the issue is that depending on the way that turn is played out, a lot of, like, cards now have, like, once per turn clauses. So you might not even be able to use any of those cards. So they might actually just be useless to you. So it's kind of the similar situation with this, is like you have to wait for the next turn to get the full value out of this card.
Okay. Interesting.
Granted, if you're adding spells to your hand that win you the game on the next turn, that could be fine. I've learned that dragons are very highly valued, but it might just be contextual on the timeline.
Yeah, that's fair. This card has been in the game since 2021.
Okay, so it's newer. It's newer.
It is newer. I believe it. Yeah, I think it's part of like the core set now, which is like the classic set. But like, remember when we went through the whole Hall of Fame thing? Like,
yeah.
Yeah, it's still there.
This one is hard though. This one is hard. Like, I know spells. Like, I don't know every spell, but I know a lot of spells. If this is like your top deck, then this is like insane, right? Because then you're like kind of back in the game. But if it's like back and forth, you're both like trading stuff. If you're gonna like spend a turn to play a 9-mana 4/12 that gets you some cards, and then your opponent's like, okay, cool, and then I just kill you the next turn because this doesn't have taunt or anything, then you never get to see those cards or use them rather. So like this card actually did nothing in that case. But if they can't kill you, it almost is like you're putting them in check, where it's like, all right, you have to kill me this turn, otherwise you're dead because I just added like every good spell to my hand to win the game. You're probably just like, you're just like rolling in your chair over there. Like, how does he think this is bad? How does he think this is bad?
No, it's just funny because like I think from a drawing perspective, this card has so many use cases that it's interesting to hear like your thought process coming from a Yu-Gi-Oh player. I don't want to spoil anything, right? So I'm sitting here like waiting to hope that you hit it, or maybe you don't hit it. Maybe it's just awful, you know, like you have no idea.
I am going to say that, especially because if this is newer, you've told me newer Hearthstone is just faster. Like, maybe this is just too slow. It's like people want it to work and it's this cool effect, and it's just like, but then you just die before you get to either resolve it or reap the benefit of it. I'm gonna risk the thumbnail. I'm gonna say people thought this card was crazy, and then it ended up like not panning out the way that people wanted it to. And it's like, I still think it's a fine card, but I think it's not as playable as people want it to be.
I think that might be like almost spot on. Like,
that's crazy.
We saw this card in a world where draw. Okay, so Demon Hunter came out the year before this, and then this card was added. So draw was already at not an all-time premium, but definitely going up. And when Malygos was added, they replaced the old Malygos with this. So there's no longer like the spell power +5.
Okay.
This was the replacement. It had a lot of interesting use cases, right? You play this on 9, fill up your whole hand theoretically. You can find the burn that you're looking for. So it had outs, but like, yeah, playing a 9-mana 4/12 that doesn't impact the board immediately is really, really bad in current Hearthstone. Like, that's unplayable. But there is a very interesting use case for this card. If you shuffle spells into your deck, for instance, there are cards, this is the one off the top of my head that was just added recently, that says deal 1 damage when you draw this, cast when drawn. So that means when you pull the spell from your deck, not only
triggers it immediately.
Yeah, not only does it trigger, it triggers the spell, but then you draw another spell afterwards, which maybe draws the other copies of it that you have in your deck.
Okay.
So Malygos has this really weird win condition of, if you have enough density of like spells that deal something or do something when they're drawn, like when they're cast when drawn, it's actually very playable. So this card is very niche on how it fits into the metagame. It's not just like, oh, this draws me a bunch of cards, I'm going to put it into my deck. Like, you need a real reason for you to want to draw spells specifically, and that's like where Malygos usually falls into.
That's interesting. It's cool that there's like that ability to like I said, because that's the biggest issue, is that you don't get to reap the benefits of it till the next turn. But the fact that you can trigger things immediately is pretty cool. That's a neat interaction.
So that's where, okay, so I just want to make it very clear for people who are watching this video. There's a lot more draw on this card, or draw on this card. There's a lot more draw on this card game, but I didn't show you the objectively like, holy shit, this card's insane. Like, I needed, I picked
it's too easy.
Yeah, I picked the ones that you would actually have to think about, because I could show you cards again, like Secret Passage, that are just like, oh, you look at it and go like, what the fuck is this? And just get the reaction of you doing that.
I wish we had that in Yu-Gi-Oh. That'd be great.
Yeah, I just don't want to do that, because I feel like it's just not as interesting as a video. So that's why I did like this, for people who are curious, because there's a lot more better draw than this.